Okay, so this video is going to be my cover video for my creative revisement of my MWA. So I decided to creatively revise my MWA1, which was my researched argument about a local issue in New Mexico, and I decided to do my research argument on child abuse in New Mexico because it is a very common issue. It is something that people are very passionate about. It's very controversial, and it's something that's been in the news a lot lately within the last few years, and it has gotten to a point where it's really common and really prevalent in Albuquerque and in New Mexico. And so and it's something that I'm really passionate about like social justice, like justice for victims of child abuse. And so whenever I was faced with the option of something to choose that I'm passionate about, like an issue, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And so yeah, I wrote a paper about that, just kind of discussing different cases that are pretty famous, pretty well known in New Mexico, of recent child abuse cases, and I basically went into detail on these cases and exactly how they affected our community and why it's an important issue to talk about. And what I made the argument that essentially we had to come together as a community to be able to combat child abuse and being able to make change in our community regarding child abuse and how many cases occur, and just essentially how to prevent it. And I tied in minimum sentencing, because that's another thing that's really prevalent in the news right now, especially with Susana Martinez trying to reinstate the death penalty. So I did include research about minimum sentencing and how sentencing is conducted for child abusers, and how it changes with different cases, and the different aspects that go into how harshly a child abuser is prosecuted, essentially, and whether or not reinstating the death penalty would be a positive or negative thing. And kind of just that was my argument, was bringing the point of Susana Martinez and different elections, different bills that were trying to get passed in New Mexico regarding child abuse. And that was the way I conducted my research, and essentially was able to support my arguments for how we could combat child abuse cases in New Mexico and try to prevent them in the future. And it was through my research about minimum sentencing and how to raise the minimum sentencing, and whether or not the death penalty would be a positive thing to reinstate. So my creative revision to my MWA1 was a poem that I wrote, and I really changed the perspective that I was going for, because in my MWA1, obviously I'm doing a research paper, and so it had to be really research heavy, really focused on different cases and supporting my argument and why the different tactics that I was suggesting that we could do to combat child abuse. It was really focused heavily on the research, and for my revision I really wanted to take a different approach, which was focusing more on the victim of one of the cases that I included in my MWA1. And so I really just wanted to write a poem about her, because that case has stuck with me since the beginning, since the day that I read the headline and I was keeping up with the story. And so I knew immediately that's what I wanted to do. And I really wanted to also just include a lot of these other cases that are that also stick with me and that I'm really passionate about. But I decided just to stick with the one case, and it was the Victoria Martins case, and this was a poem that I wrote about her. And what I essentially tried to do was give a face give emotion to the story that we talk about so much, because I feel like oftentimes we talk about these like atrocities that happen in the news, like in our classes, or we do like a rhetorical analysis on a certain situation that we see in the news, but we don't ever like take the time to experience the emotion and I guess fully grasp the story, grasp the lives of the people that were affected, and fully understand why change needs to be made. And so that's what I wanted to do essentially. I wanted to create something that would draw emotion, and I really tried to kind of like give a perspective of like she went to school and she was battling like all of these like demons, and she was only 9 whenever this was all happening. Like it was a day after her 10th birthday. It was whenever she was murdered. And so I really just wanted to give a personality to the victim, and I felt like poetry was the perfect way to do that, because that's a good way to be able to change your audience and change it from someone who's just reading my research paper to someone who is feeling the emotion of the victim of someone that like I really care about. So those are essentially the changes that I made. I focused less on the research and more on the victim, and tried to alter my audience, alter my medium, and the way that I wrote my poem to suit a new audience, to suit people like that were affected by the tragedy, people that like my new audience would be like people that were like affected by the tragedy. It could be someone that was into poetry, someone who's really passionate about social justice, someone who's passionate about justice for child abuse, and it could be even like a political standpoint. And so I feel like I definitely widened my audience by being able to make this creative revision, because it gives a name and a face to a topic that we discussed in class, essentially. Yeah, the medium I changed to a video. I did like a perform recite my poem, and my genre changed from a research argumentative essay to a poem. At the end of the poem, after I did talk about her and then give emotion to the poem, I did try to incorporate some of the different ideas that I had in my paper about how to combat child abuse and how we have to stand up as a community and come together and use our civic duty, use our voices to be able to make a change. And so I did include that at the end of my poem to try to tie together my two pieces of work, my MWA and my creative revision of my MWA. Because although I was only talking about one of the cases that I mentioned in my paper, I was still able to connect the two simply by stating briefly how we could go about making change. And I really hope that my audience would, like anybody that would see this poem or hear this poem, would be touched and I guess understand my perspective and how I altered my ideas and thoughts to address my audience in an effective way. Yeah, that is pretty much it for my creative revision, and hope you like the poem. Thank you.